Logan Breck removed the brooch from his wife's lapel in front of 200 people, and he did it, slowly, deliberately, the way a man does something when he wants to be absolutely certain it is witnessed. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of Paige setting aside everything her grandfather had taught her about who she was. 10 years of choosing Logan every single morning. Packing his lunches when the firm was bleeding money, talking him through every sleepless crisis at 2 in the morning, holding his hand through every pitch he was convinced he would lose. 10 years reduced to a single gesture. A man unpinning a brooch and pressing it into a stranger's open palm while the room held its breath. "This belongs to someone who fits my world now," he said. Paige Sutherland did not cry. She did not reach for the brooch or say his name or ask him to stop. She stood in the center of that ballroom. The same ballroom where Logan's firm had celebrated its 5th anniversary, where they had danced badly to a tragically hip song and laughed until their sides hurt. And she looked at her husband with the particular stillness of a woman who has already made her peace with something he doesn't yet know is coming. If you're new here, welcome. This is Ivory Secrets. And before we go any further, I want you to drop a comment right now. Tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, and if this is the kind of story you need to hear tonight, hit subscribe, because this one does not end where you think it does. The gala was Logan's idea. 10 years since Breck Architecture had opened its first Vancouver studio, and he had wanted to market properly. The kind of event with city councilors and donors and names that appeared in the business section of the Vancouver Sun. Paige had worn her grandmother's antique brooch, a small cluster of garnets set in silver that looked understated to anyone who didn't know its history. She had worn it because she always wore it to occasions that mattered. She had discovered Tatum Voss 40 minutes into the evening, standing at Logan's elbow with the practiced ease of someone who had been standing there for considerably longer than 40 minutes. The name had not registered at first. She had simply noted the woman's presence, the way Paige noted all new additions to Logan's professional orbit, carefully, quietly, filing it away. Later came sooner than she expected. Logan gathered the room with a tapped champagne flute and a borrowed microphone, and he spoke beautifully. He had always been a beautiful speaker, one of his most reliable gifts, about the decade of work. The team that had built it with him, the city that had given them their chance. And then he said something that had not been in any program, any speech note Paige had helped him rehearse. He said that sometimes, in order to move forward, a person had to be honest about the distance that had grown between where he was and where the people around him were. He said this thoughtfully, with the practiced weight of a man who had rehearsed a very different kind of speech. Paige understood what was happening approximately 6 seconds before it happened. He crossed the room to her, he said her name, and then he reached for the brooch. "You were perfect for who I was at the beginning," he said, and his voice was kind in the particular way that certain cruelties are kind, designed to look like consideration from the outside. "But I owe it to both of us to be honest." He placed the brooch in Tatum's open palm, and Tatum received it with the composed expression of someone who had been rehearsing her own role in this scene for quite some time. Paige looked at the brooch in that woman's hand. She looked at it for exactly the amount of time it took to understand, clearly and completely, that this moment was not the worst thing that would ever happen to her. Then she looked at Logan. "All right," she said quietly. That was all, 2 words. The room was so still she could hear the candles. She collected her coat from the cloakroom herself. She walked to the lobby herself. She stood outside on the wet Vancouver sidewalk in October, the North Shore Mountains invisible behind clouds, and she breathed. Then she called Hugh Dorsey. He answered on the second ring. This told her he had been expecting this call, possibly for longer than she had. "Hugh," she said, "it's time." A pause. "I'll have everything ready tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. 9, she confirmed. She did not call her friend Cora until she was already in a cab, already moving toward a hotel on Georgia Street, already putting the physical distance between herself and that ballroom that she needed in order to think clearly. Cora picked up immediately, her voice carrying the specific frequency of someone who has been waiting for a call they hoped would never come. "I heard," Cora said. "Someone already texted. Oh, Paige, are you?" "I'm okay." A pause. "I will be." "That man," Cora said in the tone of someone exercising considerable restraint, "is going to feel very stupid very soon." "He doesn't know that yet," Paige said. "But you do." "I'm starting to." She checked into the hotel under her grandmother's maiden name. Old habit. Automatic. The kind of thing you do when you've spent 15 years being very careful about which version of yourself you present to which room. She sat on the edge of the bed without removing her coat and stayed very still for a long time. Here is what Logan Breck did not know about the woman he had just finished with in front of 200 colleagues and clients and city officials. He did not know because Paige Sutherland had spent the entire length of their marriage making absolutely certain he would not know. Not out of deception. Not exactly. More out of a promise made in a sunlit study, in a house on Salt Spring Island, to an old man with clear gray eyes and hands that had built more than anyone looking at them would have guessed. Her grandfather, Walter Sutherland, had spent 50 years quietly assembling one of the largest private real estate and resource holding portfolios in British Columbia. He had done it without fanfare, without press releases, without a single profile or gala in his honor. Privacy, he used to say, is not the absence of power, it is its most sophisticated expression. He had raised Paige after her parents died, a car accident, on the Coquihalla, a February morning, black ice and a transport truck. She had been 9 years old. Walter had taken her to Salt Spring Island and raised her in the old house by the water, and he had taught her everything he knew, and the thing he knew most deeply was this: wealth reveals people. It does not create them. It reveals what was already there. Before he died, 2 years before Paige moved to Vancouver, enrolled in library science, and sat next to a bright-eyed, furiously ambitious architecture student named Logan Breck, Walter had asked for one thing. "Don't tell anyone, not until you're certain. Go live your real life," he had said. "Find out who loves you when they have no reason to. Only then will you know if it's genuine." She had kept that promise through 10 years of marriage, through the lean years of the firm, and the good ones, through champagne and crises and Tuesday evenings making dinner she had never needed to make. Through watching the man she loved grow into someone she increasingly did not recognize. Success had not made Logan cruel. It had simply made him certain. Certain of his own narrative, certain of what he had built and how, certain of what he deserved. And when you become that certain, you stop seeing the things that don't fit the story. He had stopped seeing Paige somewhere around year 7. She had noticed. She had chosen to stay anyway, because love, even when it has begun to curdle at the edges, still means something to the people who chose it with their whole hearts. In the hotel room, she let herself cry for exactly 10 minutes, not more. Then she washed her face, hung up her coat, and opened her laptop. Hugh Dorsey's office was on the 14th floor of a building on West Hastings, with a view of Burrard Inlet that Paige had always loved. She arrived at 8:55. The receptionist checked the appointment list and adjusted her posture in the involuntary way people do when they realize they are looking at someone considerably more significant than they had anticipated. She offered coffee without being asked. Then, "Black," Paige said. "Thank you." Hugh came to meet her personally. 70 years old, silver-haired, wearing a charcoal suit with the kind of quiet precision that takes decades to develop. He had been her grandfather's attorney for 35 years, and her own for the past 12. He shook her hand with both of his, and in that one gesture said everything he wasn't saying out loud. They sat at the long conference table, and he opened the first of 4 folders. "Your grandfather's portfolio," Hugh said, "as it currently stands across all holding structures and trust vehicles, has a total consolidated value of..." He named a number. Paige set down her coffee cup. She had always known there was wealth. She had known the broad shape of it, the Salt Spring property, the trust that had carried her through school. the quiet assurance that she would never genuinely struggle. She had not known the current figure. She had not known about 15 years of compound growth in the hands of a man who, as Hugh put it, never panicked and never chased trends. "There's something else," Hugh said, turning to the second folder. "Something directly relevant to your current situation." She waited. "Your grandfather, when he became aware of your relationship with Logan Breck, made certain inquiries. Not because he doubted your judgment, because it was his nature to be thorough. He identified Logan's firm as a genuinely promising emerging practice, real structural talent, he'd noted, but critically undercapitalized in its early years, so he made certain arrangements." Paige went very still. Through a series of intermediary investment vehicles, Hugh continued, none traceable to you or the Sutherland name, he ensured that 2 of Logan's most critical early contracts were underwritten when the firm could not otherwise have secured them. The Granville Island Commission, the project that established Breck Architecture's reputation, was among them. "Logan's entire career," she said slowly. "The foundation of it," Hugh agreed. "The talent was always his. The runway to use that talent was yours." She sat with that for a long moment. There was grief in it. The particular grief of understanding that the man who had told her she was perfect for who he was starting out had been correct in ways he could not begin to comprehend. Then she said, "What about Tatum Voss?" Hugh's expression shifted carefully. He slid a printed page across the table. "Voss is her mother's name. Her father was a man named Victor Hawthorne." "Victor Hawthorne," Hugh said, "was your grandfather's development partner on the Okanagan Highlands project, a resort development near Kelowna. Significant capital on both sides. Both families invested heavily." He paused. "Your grandfather bought Victor out 6 months before the project's completion." Paige looked at the page. He bought him out when he knew the value was about to change. Hugh nodded carefully. The buyout was legal. The terms were disclosed. Victor agreed to them. But Walter had information about a pending provincial land designation that Victor had not sought out. Walter knew the project's value was about to increase substantially. Victor did not. She pressed her lips together. "Victor Hawthorne died in 2004, Hugh said. "His daughter grew up in the shadow of that loss. Not destitution, but the particular bitterness of a family that had been close to something significant and had it taken from them by a trusted partner's better information. Tatum has been in Vancouver for 14 months. Logan's firm appeared on her radar approximately 8 months ago. The introduction to him was engineered." Paige sat back. She thought about Tatum, standing at Logan's elbow in that ballroom, the practiced ease, the patience of someone who had been playing a long game for a very long time. She thought about her grandfather and Victor Hawthorne, about a partnership and a wrong that had been technically legal and humanly damaging, and about how such wrongs, if they go unaddressed long enough, become inherited. They pass from parent to child. They shape lives, they generate plans. "Hugh," she said, "did my grandfather ever try?" He slid a 4th folder across before she finished the sentence. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter, dated March 1992. Her grandfather's handwriting, unmistakable. Addressed to Victor Hawthorne. She read it. Walter had written 4 pages. Clear and unvarnished, without the protections of legal language. He wrote that he had used his informational advantage over a partner who trusted him, that he had told himself it was simply business, and that he had found, in the months that followed, that this justification wore increasingly thin. He proposed a retroactive arrangement, a specific figure, with compound consideration, that would give Victor a share of the Okanagan Highlands returns, commensurate with what an equal partnership would have earned. He wrote, "I am not asking your forgiveness, Victor. I am asking for the chance to act like the person I should have been." At the bottom of the last page, in Walter's own hand, a single added note, returned unopened. "Victor in hospital. We'll try again." He tried, she said, almost to herself. 3 times over the following year, Hugh said quietly. Victor's health prevented every attempt from reaching him. By the time Victor had recovered enough to be reachable, the estrangement was complete. Walter kept the letter. He put it in this file, and left it for me to know about without ever being certain what to do with it. She sat in that conference room for a very long time after Hugh finished. The rain had cleared, and Burrard Inlet was flat and silver through the windows, and the North Shore Mountains stood in sharp relief against a sky that had gone the particular pale blue of Vancouver after weather. She thought about Victor Hawthorne dying with a wound that had never been addressed, about Tatum growing up, carrying that wound, turning it into a plan, spending years building toward a moment of reclamation, about Logan standing in a ballroom, completely unaware that the woman he had brought into his life was not what she appeared, that the wife he had dismissed was not what she appeared, that virtually nothing in the story he had been telling himself about his own success was fully accurate. She thought about a letter sitting unopened in a hospital room. She was not going to let this end without that letter being read. She called Cora from the parking garage. "I need something," she said. "Do you know Tatum Voss?" A pause. "I know of her. She's been at a few events. Young professionals board at the VAG. Can you get me in the same room as her?" Informally. "Somewhere it looks like coincidence." Silence. Paige. "I'm not making a scene. There's a fundraising dinner Thursday at the Museum of Anthropology. Her company's a table sponsor. Put me at the adjacent table." "Okay," Cora said, and then quieter. "What's actually going on?" "Something bigger than Logan," Paige said. "I'll explain it when I understand all of it myself." She spent the 2 days before Thursday reading, not just the files Hugh had sent, but everything she could locate on the Okanagan Highlands Project. Archived coverage from the Kelowna Daily Courier, property records, Development Corporation filings. She read the way she had always read when something mattered, methodically, patiently, building the picture from one detail at a time. Thursday evening came clear and cold, a proper October night in Vancouver that smelled of cedar and salt water, and the particular promise of winter not yet arrived. Paige wore a dark gray dress and her grandmother's ring on her right hand. No brooch. The Museum of Anthropology was the right room for this. High ceilings and the great glass wall overlooking the water, the kind of space that quietly insists on perspective. Paige found her table, accepted water from a server, and looked across to table 9. Tatum Voss was already seated. She was composed, and very still in the way of someone who has learned to manage her own attention with great precision. Her eyes moved around the room in a professional sweep, and when they reached Paige's table, they stopped. The moment lasted less than 2 seconds. Tatum looked away smoothly, said something to the person beside her, and adjusted her expression back to social ease. But Paige had seen it, the fractional falter, the recognition. Between the main course and dessert, Paige stood, set her napkin on the table, and walked to table 9. She stopped beside Tatum's chair. "Hello, Tatum," she said. "I'd like 5 minutes, just us." A beat, 2 beats. The person beside Tatum glanced between them, with the polite unease of someone sensing a landscape shifting. "All right," Tatum said finally. 5 minutes." They found a quiet corridor off the main hall, glass on one side, the dark grounds below. Tatum turned and looked at Paige with the expression of someone prepared to manage whatever this was. "I know about Victor Hawthorne," Paige said. "I know about the Okanagan Highlands. I know what my grandfather did. And I know what you've been trying to do about it." Something moved through Tatum's face, confirmation and weariness, and something older and rawer beneath both of them. "Then you know why I did what I did," Tatum said quietly. "I know how it started," Paige said. "I'm less certain you know how to let it end." Silence. "Your grandfather took a partnership away from my father," Tatum said. Her voice was even, but the evenness cost something. "He used information my father didn't have. My father spent the last years of his life believing he had been cheated by someone he trusted, and he died that way. I grew up watching my mother rebuild everything from nothing." "I know," Paige said. "Don't say that like you understand it." "You're right," Paige said. "I don't understand it. I grew up with everything. That's true, and I won't pretend otherwise." She paused. But what my grandfather did was not fraud. It was not theft. It was a man who was better informed, making a legal business decision without mercy. That's a real wrong. It produced real harm. But it isn't the criminal act you've built your entire strategy around. Tatum looked at her steadily. The result is the same. The result is the same, Paige agreed. And I'm not asking you to pretend it isn't. She paused. My grandfather left a letter, written to your father in March 1992. He acknowledged what he had done. He proposed a specific financial arrangement to address it, a genuine one. He sent it, and it came back unopened. Your father was in hospital. Tatum went very still. He tried 3 times after that to reach your father directly, Paige said. He was never able to. He kept the letter. I have it, and I want you to have it. It was always your family's. The silence that followed was the kind that happens when something a person has believed completely for their entire adult life turns out to be more complicated than they knew. Not wrong, the wound was real, the loss was real. But not the whole truth either. He never told my father, Tatum said finally. He tried. Your father was too ill to receive it when it came. By the time he'd recovered, the distance was too great. Tatum looked at the dark glass, at her own reflection in it. I need time, she said finally. Take it, Paige said. She slid a folder across. There's a financial proposal in there as well. Not a settlement, a recognition. What the Sutherland Trust would have paid your father at the time of that letter, with 33 years of growth. It's something real. It's what he was owed. Tatum opened it. She read the first page. She closed it. Why, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because it's the right thing, Paige said, and because someone should have done it 30 years ago. She called Logan the next morning. He answered carefully, voice neutral, the tone he used when he wasn't sure what someone wanted from him. I need to meet with you, she said, not about the settlement, about your firm. He agreed to meet Friday morning, his office. She arrived at 9 and he was already there, looking like a man who had not slept, wearing the effort of confidence like a coat that no longer quite fit. She opened the first folder and began at the beginning. She told him about Walter Sutherland, about the trust structures and the holding companies with their deliberately uninteresting names, about a vehicle called Sutherland Pacific Holdings, a name he would have had no reason to recognize, and the 2 critical early contracts for Breck Architecture that it had quietly underwritten when the firm could not otherwise have survived. She watched his face while she talked. She had watched that face for 10 years and knew every register it had. She watched him absorb what she was saying the way you watch someone absorb a physical impact, the slight delay, the processing, the moment it actually lands. You funded my firm, he said. His voice was barely audible. My grandfather did, she said, anonymously. The work was always yours. The talent was always yours. But the foundation, Logan, the capital that kept you operational through the first 3 years when you should have folded, that came from my family. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. She told him about Victor Hawthorne, about the Okanagan Highlands, about Tatum and the 14 months and the engineered introduction and the investment syndicate, whose backers, when traced carefully through their corporate layers, connected to a family that believed it was owed something by the Sutherlands. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet for a long time. She came here because of you, he said. She came because of history that predates both of us by 30 years. Paige said, I was the closest available connection to that history. You were the path to me. He looked at the table, and then, with the particular quality of a man who has been telling himself a story about his own life, for long enough to have forgotten it as a story, something went out of him. Not the good parts, not the intelligence, not the genuine drive, but the armor, the particular puffed-up certainty of so many times for his own origin story that he has stopped questioning it. I told you were perfect for my beginnings, he said quietly. I had no idea how true that was. You had no reason to know, Paige said. I should have seen you, he said. I should have kept seeing you. What you do with that now is yours to decide, she said. But there are partners in this firm who deserve the truth, and there is a syndicate proposal that cannot move forward on its current terms. And there is a version of this company that you can actually build cleanly from here, on foundations everyone can see. That version is worth more than the one you've been performing. He looked at her for a long moment. What was left on his face, after all the certainty had gone out of it, was someone she recognized. Someone she hadn't seen in years. He let his attorney reach hers about the settlement within the week. The revised terms reflected something real. Tatum called 3 weeks later. I read the letter, she said, all of it. I know, Paige said. He tried. It was almost a question. He tried, Paige confirmed. In his way. His way was not enough, but he tried. A long silence. I'm going to accept the proposal, Tatum said. Not because it repairs everything. It doesn't. But because refusing it wouldn't honor my father either. And because... She stopped. Because I think I've been carrying something that was never mine to carry alone. That's honest, Paige said. I'm working on it, Tatum said quietly. 6 weeks later, the Sutherland Foundation was announced, not through a PR firm or a polished press release. Paige wrote 3 paragraphs herself in her own voice and put her name on them plainly and publicly for the first time. The foundation was built to provide early-stage capital and mentorship to entrepreneurs across Canada who lacked access to traditional funding networks. People who were talented and driven and simply had never had a grandfather who built invisible structures around their lives. Cora called within the hour. It says Sutherland Foundation, she said, as in Walter Sutherland. Yes, Paige said. As in your family. Yes. A pause. Paige, how much are we actually talking about? A significant amount, Paige said. Oh, Cora said, and then quieter, oh. I'll explain everything at dinner, Paige said. Thursday, I'm buying. The applications began arriving within 48 hours. She read every one herself. Some were not quite right for the mandate. Some were genuinely promising. And some of them, the ones written in the careful, specific language of people who had spent years being told their ideas, were good. But that there simply wasn't room. That they'd need more connections, more collateral, more of the particular social capital that money generates, only when it is already present. Some of those stopped her entirely. She read every word of everyone. Logan called on a Sunday afternoon 3 months later, with no agenda and no attorney on the line. He called to say that he had restructured the firm's founding documentation with full legal transparency, that his longest-tenured partner, a man named Riss, had told him the company felt more solid than it had in years. He called to say he understood things he hadn't understood before. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not try to reframe what had happened. He simply said, I'm sorry. I see what you were. I see what I did with it. She believed him. She told him so. Build the firm you were always capable of building, she said. That's what matters now. The foundation's first funding cycle closed in the spring. 12 companies across 8 provinces, from a Cree-owned outdoor apparel brand in northern Manitoba to a biotech startup run by 2 sisters in Halifax who had been turned by 7 conventional investors in 3 years. Paige called every founder personally. She told each of them the same thing. This is a bet, not a transaction. A bet on you. Tatum took a consulting role with the foundation 6 months in, quietly, without announcement. The kind of arrangement that begins because someone offers a useful observation in a conversation and the other person says, simply, we could use that perspective here. She was good. Whatever else she had been performing as for the years of her campaign, the skills she had built along the way were real and considerable. They did not become friends exactly, but they became something that had its own kind of value. 2 women who had arrived at the same table from entirely opposite directions and found, to neither of their complete surprises, that they were both trying to build something better than what they had inherited. Paige stood at the window of the foundation's new offices on Canby Street one morning, coffee in hand, watching the city below. A message arrived from Hugh. The foundation had been cited in a national business publication as one of the most innovative capital access initiatives in the country. His message read simply, "Walter would have stood up for this." She thought about her grandfather, about the promise he had asked her to keep and what it had cost her, and what it had protected, and what it had in the end made possible. She thought about the letter that had sat unopened in a hospital room for 30 years, and what different shape everything might have taken if it had arrived at the right moment. She thought about 10 years of a marriage that was real, even when it wasn't sustainable. She thought about Logan in his office, building something on foundations he could finally actually see. She put the coffee down. She opened her laptop. There were 14 new applications waiting. She started reading. The woman Logan Breck had called perfect for his beginnings was sitting at a desk in the most significant position she had ever occupied, not because of the inheritance, not because of the title, not because Vancouver now knew her name, because she had chosen, at every moment when destruction would have been easier, to build instead. Walter Sutherland used to say that true wealth is not what you protect in the dark. It is what you choose to do when you finally step into the light. Paige had spent 10 years in the quiet, and she had done it out of love and promise, and the particular discipline of a woman who understood the difference between power kept and power used. The quiet was over, and she was only just beginning.